And now, if we could continue with Raquel Xalabarder, IP Law Professor at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. Thank you, Raquel.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me here to talk about this very exciting topic for authors and performers. I think Article 18 of the Copyright Directive is very good news. And I want to say it's very good news, but it's not enough. It's very good news because it tries to solve what I call the real value gap, the context that Severin was telling us, that, you know, the weaker contractual position of authors and performers in these very complex audiovisual markets and exploitation scenarios that make it, you know, very much the rule that authors and performers are cut off from the chain of exploitation, get no remuneration because they basically assign the rights to the producer in exchange of a one fee or one payment, and that's all. So it's very good news. We're trying to solve a real value gap that I would call, but it's not enough. And it's not enough because the directive does not completely address the job. Member states must now finish the job started by the EU legislature. So, Article 18 establishes a general principle that authors and performers must receive appropriate and proportionate remuneration for the exploitation of works and performances. This is a principle that already exists in many national laws, not generally, and this is the good news. Now it applies to all sorts of sectors. And the good news also is that being so clear and precise, this will have a direct effect in any national law and national contracts. But Article 18 applies to any license, any transfer of exploitation rights, regardless of the form. It could even apply, it should even apply to implied licenses, transfers of rights, presumptive transfers of rights, as we have in many national laws. The principle is meant to apply to new productions and old productions. Let's make sure that we don't make strange interpretations of the transitory clauses in Article 26 and 27, and that we make strange readings that may interfere with this clear intent of the scope of the principle. But the good news about this principle is that it's not only a binding principle. It imposes an obligation on national legislators. It's an obligation to make sure that authors and performers are fairly, appropriate, and adequately remunerated. This Article 18 was very much cooked into Parliament. It's true that it was not in the original Commission proposal, but it very much underlies this principle. It justifies all the different contractual provisions that we have in Article 19 to 22. So much that at the end of the day, we can see them as a contractual corpus, right? Member states need to implement the 5 provisions in a comprehensive and in a, a constructive manner within all of them. I say that the better we make use of the possibilities that Article 18 opens for the national legislator, the less need for authors and performers to turn to these remaining contractual provisions, many of which will not be applicable, will not benefit authors in audiovisual exploitation scenarios, audiovisual sectors and the musical sectors. Of course, national legislators may be tempted to just copy-paste Article 18, but I would say this is not enough. They need to go farther, right? As explained already in Article 18.2, and that's why we have a second paragraph in Article 18.2, and in Recital 73, member states need to implement any other mechanism, different mechanisms. It says existing or newly introduced mechanisms to make sure that authors and performers receive this fair remuneration. Of course, we know that improving contract law rules is necessary. That's why we have all the other articles. But we all know, as we know by national laws that already provide for these provisions, that this alone will not suffice to effectively secure fair remuneration for authors. So what mechanisms are we talking about? Well, we're talking about, and the directive refers to it, collective bargaining agreements. We're also talking about statutory remuneration rights, which did not make it to the final directive, but was very clear in the a report that the Parliament, where the Parliament introduced Article 18. And of course, we may be talking about other mechanisms. Think of extended collective licensing in the Nordic countries, right? Let me just say one word about sectorial collective bargaining agreements. They have certainly a significant role to play in securing remuneration, also in audiovisual context, but let's also be very realistic and accept that the conditions for collective bargaining to take place, to succeed, and to be subsequently enforced do not exist in all countries and let alone in all sectors. The reason why I want to devote this slide is to one of these mechanisms, which I think has proven to be very efficient in national laws to secure remuneration in audiovisual sectors as well as in music markets. But let's talk about the audiovisual one, especially in this very complex and long exploitation context that Severin was telling us. The statutory remuneration rights, we call them sometimes residual remuneration right, because this remuneration right is retained by the author or the performer once they transfer the exclusive right to the producer. It is very much the system put in place in Article 5 of the Rental and Lending Directive. But even before that, remuneration rights existed in some national laws to secure fair remuneration in the audiovisual market. Ivan was reminding us about that being the case in Spain, right? What is good about these residual remuneration rights? Well, it's a win-win. It's a win-win-win for all, right? They do not duplicate exclusive rights. In fact, they operate on the basis of a double exercise of the exclusive right. So we're not turning an exclusive right into a remuneration right. No. We are basically exercising the exclusive right twice. First, when the author transfers the exclusive right to the producer, production contract, and second, when the producer licenses these exclusive rights to the end user, to the licensee, right? It's only when this double exercise of the exclusive right happens that the residual remuneration right kicks in. They do not disturb the contract, the production contract, the scope of the transfer, the agreement that Severin was telling us about, this bargain struck at that time. This goes undisturbed. The producer remains in control of all the exclusive rights, all the licensing process, the main revenue streams. He's the one who exercises what we call the jus prohibendi, the exclusivity that confers the exclusive rights, the exploitation rights. But at the same time, this remuneration right allows for a constant and direct flow of remuneration via collective management organization. This makes the life of the producers easier because they are complying with fulfilling their obligation to provide fair remuneration for authors, but they don't need to deal with all the hassle that this would entail. The good news is that by making this remuneration separate, sticking it out from the production chain of exploitation, the producer's chain of exploitation, we are making sure via CMO's collective management organization that these revenues will keep flowing over the different markets and means of exploitation, which might not have been envisaged in the original production contracts, right? We did not know 20 years ago what would be the means of exploitation and markets that we have today. So it's a remuneration right that allows for a flow of remuneration directly via collective management organization, but that applies on top and preserving any contractual agreement, including the remuneration agreed at the production time, in the production contract. It's very convenient in case of audiovisual and music productions where the markets are changing and they involve a lot of contributions to make the production happen, and where one author or one performer, exercising a contractual rights or contractual rules would not make any difference. So basically, the good news, I was saying, it's a win-win-win for all. I think collective management organizations are well prepared to negotiate the fees with the licensees that have been licensed by the producer, and that they can do a very good job because they are prepared to do so, to make sure that this flow arrives to the different authors and performers through the contracts that they have, the reciprocal agreement, reciprocal representation agreements. In order to enforce these statutory remuneration rights, we need a legislative intervention. We need a statutory enactment, right? Because this remuneration is going to be paid not by the contractual parties. It's going to be paid by a third person, the end user, the licensee. And in order for him to be paying for that, we need a statutory remuneration right. So now we need to wait for the member states to finish the job started by the Commission. And let's make sure that, or let's hope that when they go the distance and they finally introduce, whenever necessary and well designed and well thought of, these statutory remuneration rights, they make sure that they take advantage and learn from the previous mistakes we committed in some countries when transposing this residual remuneration right in Article 5 of the Rental Directive. Let's make sure that these residual remuneration rights, these statutory remuneration rights, are set as unwaivable and inalienable, that they are paid by the end user, by the licensee, not by the producer, and that they are managed only by collective management organizations. Because we know that when any of these three fails, authors and performers do not get the remuneration they are entitled for. So, very good news, but the work is not done yet. So let's hope that member states live up to the task and effectively secure authors and performers this very well-deserved remuneration that they are entitled